Hello, everyone. It's good afternoon here from the East Coast. I think it's morning there in the Pacific Coast and evening, late evening in Egypt. And everyone tuning in from different parts of the world, welcome to this discussion slash webinar on the topic preparing for change, the need for discernment, brought to you by Women and Global Change. My name is Dhardon Sharling. I am going to be your moderator slash speaker slash essentially, I think, someone who comes with a voice of her own, just as all of us in this room do. So this morning, I think I start my day by meditating for 10 minutes at least. I offer what Buddhists would normally call as prostrations. You pray and then you kind of really bow so low and stretch yourself on the ground. That's like embracing humility. Always do that. And then in that rested zone or space, I move to something very chaotic. That is, I log on to bbc.com on my laptop or sometimes on my app. And then I watch the news, and then I'm always transported to what we called the reality. And this morning, four top headlines stuck out to me. First is President Trump may have hidden classified documents. That's from where I'm based at, the US, and where Sharon is also based at. And then on the far east is fierce battles reported in Ukraine's Kherson region. 6 months and the war does not seem to abate. And then somewhere in Saudi Arabia, there's a woman, Nara Al-Kahatini, who's jailed for 45 years because of a certain social media post. And then very unbelievingly, in Spain, there's been a hailstorm in the middle of summer, and one giant hailstone hit a toddler, and the toddler succumb to his injuries. So that's how I start my day with. And then I come to this discussion. And now this begs the question, why do we need to change? Why do we need this important thing called change that this discussion is about? And why that change can only be strengthened by a need for discernment. And this important discussion is what we are trying to tackle here. And I have with me two very important, I would say, people of conscience, people with important voices, people who are doing their bit every day, unrelentlessly for the last 50 plus years, making the little bit of change that they can from their end. I have with me Dr. Sharon Mijares. You've all read about her in the presenter's bio. I have with me Aisha Rafea from Egypt. And before I actually start this discussion, I'd like to flag up a very important caveat to actually being part of this discussion. All three of us, Sharon, Aisha, and myself, we don't come across as experts. Yes, we do don the role that of a speaker, but we do not call ourselves experts, nor do we think we have an authoritative voice on this important topic. I think in this room, there are people, I can speak for myself, there are people who are far more knowledgeable, far more experienced than me. And that's why we look at this space, this virtual space today, as we see face to face, as an important co-working space where we're together to work together, to brainstorm ideas, to share, because the real learning only happens when you share it, right? And therefore, the way this webinar is designed is we, all three of us, have something to offer. That's how I would like to put it. We have something to offer in addition to what you as an individual, all of you have to offer as well. And that's why after our individual presentations, the three speakers, will have a little bit of a discussion, following which we want to give the floor open to all of the attendees for you to be also able to pose questions. But because at this point in time, as and when I'm speaking, I see 19 of us, and it would be quite chaotic if all of us had questions. And that's where what I will do is, should the number not go beyond 25, I will have all of you turn on your videos and we'll have a lively, engaging, friendly discussion toward the end. I wouldn't necessarily call it a Q&A round, but I would call it a follow-up discussion. All right, so I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Sharon Mijares, who is a psychologist and a lead faculty at the California Institute for Human Science. She's a practicing psychotherapist with a focus on psychospiritual growth. She's a professor at National University and the University of Massachusetts Global. Sharon has authored and co-authored 7 books focused on psychological and spiritual development, including The Revolution of the Breath, a tribute to its wisdom, power, and beauty, which was published in 2009. Her 2013 edited book, A Force Such as the World Has Never Known, Women Creating Change, brings women together from many cultures and many areas of work. And I am one of the contributing authors as well, and that's where my friendship with Sharon started. Sharon's 7th book, The Power of the Feminine, Facing Shadow, Evoking Light, was co-authored with an Egyptian Sufi leader, Aisha Rafea, who is Aisha's sister, a Tibetan, again, that's me, an environmentalist, Joshua Amponson from Ghana, and a US professor, Mary Rogers. And Sharon has presented at workshops in Costa Rica, Ecuador, Egypt, India, Mexico, Scotland, Uganda, you name it, it just spans across the world. She is a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, and lives in New Mexico. So over to you, Sharon.
Okay, thank you, Dhardon. One of the things that I want to go along with is, like you were mentioning about the daily news, and how you also have that within part of your meditation. We're living in very strange times, and we need to bring it all together. Structures that we used to be able to count upon for good information and meaningful guidelines are all changing. Oppositions are growing, and life is becoming more erratic by the day. Dhardon just mentioned a few things. There's a lot more that could be added. It's like, yikes. In the midst of these changes, we are inundated with conspiracy theories, political conflict, environmental threats, and much more. Many people seem to be losing understanding of moral behaviors. Humanity is in the midst of momentous challenges, leading to either suicidal behaviors or the emergence into a more peaceful and loving paradigm. But this humanity has intense and opposing ideologies, and people are struggling to know what they believe in the midst of conspiracy theories and outright lies as well. How do we know what is true? We need to learn how to do good critical research. I'm taking a more scholarly approach in the beginning of our talk. Social media should not be the bottom line for research. We need to understand how to discern what's true and what is not. How do we understand the role of science? How do we know what we know? This is epistemology. We need to clear ourselves of introjected beliefs and know the values of our greater selves. Introjected beliefs are those things that we swallow, that are given to us by our family, by our peers, by our society, etc. And they block out a lot of our own knowing. In the last 2 years, we have all witnessed an amazing change in comprehension. And I have to ask, what is causing this breakdown in cognitive processing? On news programs, I see rising resistance occurring on a global basis, be it mass demonstrations, violence against governments, and also violence against innocent groups based on the color of their skin or religious affiliation. The uproar over simple things like wearing a mask or social distancing went far beyond what's considered normal social discourse. Many people believe this is being prompted by fear of change, and this is what we need to look at: fear of an unknown future. Certainly, humanity is faced with a great deal of stressors. There's the environmental crisis with fires, floods, tornadoes, and droughts. There are threats of nuclear war, economic changes, political strife, and more. We're in a time of great uncertainty, and it asks us to unite for a greater purpose, one that will benefit all of life. The patriarchal era is ending, but it's going down with a bang. It appears that all of our social and religious ideologies are being challenged to make room for this new age. We can see the good changes appearing on the scene. All of the world's religious traditions have always emphasized loving our neighbors as we do ourselves. It's a very complete ideology, honoring both self and other, but we haven't done very well with this. But you do see in the news that it's being challenged, and racial issues are really up to discuss. The voices of all peoples, all groups, beginning to contribute toward this change. That's the bright light. It moves, we want to move from a limited ego stance to a cultural one and reinforce the spiritual task of universal caring for all of life. We are currently seeing all the movements and the oppositions toward this unity. Now, many animals sense dangers and respond accordingly. Most likely humans can sense these same threats, but it only occurs on a subliminal level and doesn't necessarily enter conscious awareness. We don't know how to cognitively name the underlying unease and related fear. Human beings have many ways to avoid facing the political and social realities of these changing times. Many people also choose to zone out with social media and a lot of meaningless entertainment. Why do I say meaningless? Given the relevance of the above threats, ignoring them or seeking answers on social media is not helping all that much. We are in the midst of transition and the future is yet unknown. This is a big wake-up call. How we glean and discern knowledge can help us maintain inner and outer balance. In my talk, I'm defining facts, epistemological ways of knowing, authentic morality, and will each provide examples for developing inner perception. I will share ways that I handle conflict in my own life by 1, going within, examining the emotional response, 2, seeing the motivation behind it, and this is followed by 3, choosing the most ethical and balanced response in a centered way. For example, is the conflict an issue of power? Most issues have an element of power struggle within them. Where is the power imbalance? The ego stance needs to be examined. Is there a need to stand up for one's position or to simply let go? Discerning the right inner and outer response is an important goal. So let's begin by examining what a fact is. Bear with me, as this part of my talk is a bit like going into an academic classroom. Facts and science. A fact is a thing that is known or proven to be true. The theorist has an idea, but it must be disproven or proven by observable behaviors. It also has to be replicable. Another person in a different setting with different research participants will receive the same or similar result. Science is a continuous process because further research may result in new observations over time. This will change the reporting, but it does not mean the scientific process is invalid. It is doing what it was intended to do. Science has a built-in structure for changing as new information is revealed. But increasing numbers of people lack trust in our social and academic structures, especially when it comes to political agendas. There is increasing observable divisiveness throughout the globe, and it's also impacting how we think and how we relate. Many people may be ignoring historical or economic facts, and they lack education in these areas. They ignore scientific knowledge, favoring what's gleaned from social media. One of the largest and most insane examples of the past 2 years has been the reaction to COVID-19 and its variants. Here's a quote from the CDC. On January 30th of 2020, COVID-19 was declared a public health emergency. At that time, the official death toll was 171. By December 31st, 2020, less than 12 months later, this figure was over 1,813,000. It's also believed that preliminary estimates suggested the total number of global deaths attributed to the 2020 COVID-19 statistics was at least 3 million, representing 1.2 million more deaths than officially reported, end of quote. The global shutdown set off varied and extreme reactions. Factual reports are also affected by the governments reporting them. Poor countries may not have the ability to maintain complicated statistics. So this changes the original report and adds yet another fact to add to the calculation. For this, we need a good explanation of how science works. And yes, there are reports that some statistics of death were not reported. These factors added to public confusion and coupled with fear of the unknown affected cognitive processing. One result is that given a lack of understanding of the process, fabrications are constructed to fill in the gaps. People start responding to them without discernment, and the responses on vaccines lacked historical and present knowledge. In fear of the unknown future, people are ready to leap on any belief, be it sensible, logical, or not. And critical common sense is seriously absent. According to the definition on Wikipedia, it is defined as common sense is practical judgment concerning everyday matters or a basic ability to perceive, understand, and judge in a manner that is shared by all, common to nearly all people, end of quote. Humanity seems to be dividing into little groups based on conflicting ideologies instead of uniting in some kind of common sense approach. We are all part of this change though, and we cannot ignore or tune out what is occurring in our midst. Spiritual bypass is another problem, as people in this group wish to ignore what is before them and choose to only focus on positive images and thoughts. The shadow is ignored, so it's inevitable that it will be projected on others. Carl Jung advised that we need to confront the shadow and the world of darkness, noting that, quote, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness unconscious, end of quote. He also noted that, quote, unfortunately, there can be no doubt that humanity is on the whole less good than he imagines himself or wants to be. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious light, the blacker and denser it is. At all counts, it forms an unconscious snag, thwarting our most well-known intentions, end of quote. So we want to examine our shadow, as otherwise it will be acting unconsciously. And I'll give one more quote from Jung because it's so well said. The psychological rule says that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. That is to say, when the individual remains undivided and does not become conscious of his inner opposite, the world must act out the conflict and be torn into opposing halves. That's a very deep thought to contemplate. And it's also certainly obvious this is what is happening. We see these opposing halves acting out in the world, and we don't really know at this point in time how to relate with it. Also, our religious and humanitarian ideals have defined morality. When we developed an innate sense of morality and related behaviors, we are more apt to respect others and treat them with dignity and kindness. It's common sense to begin to know how to handle these things, seeing whether they cause good or harm, how they influence others around us. Sadly, more often than not, our ideas of morality are interjected cultural and religious ideals. We need to make them real by knowing what we really believe, rather than acting like a piece of paper being blown about by the winds of external forces. This transformation takes self-questioning. In the United States, a conspiratorial group calling themselves QAnon has become quite influential. They literally believe and promote the belief that the Democratic Party and Hollywood actors have large pedophile rings. They promote insane and unsubstantiated beliefs, yet their membership has grown due to the lack of self-knowledge and the capacity for discernment. The amount of people Embracing these and many other unsubstantiated beliefs is increasing. What I do want to address, though, is how to maneuver through this growing cognitive unrest. Our first step is to know ourselves and to be able to go within our deepest, darkest thoughts and feelings to explore them. The more we know about ourselves, the better we can also discern what is happening in the outer world. And this is where discernment comes into place. Our biggest learning moments can occur when we are emotionally upset. They offer opportunities for greater self-knowledge. Humans can respond in many ways through denial, repression, projection, and other forms of defense mechanisms. These are all ways that either limit or prevent discernment, or we can correctly discern the meaning in the process. According to Merriam-Webster dictionary, discernment is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure. Developing skill in discerning leads to greater self-mastery. It is about having the awareness along with the ability to understand it and then ascertain the best action. This is supported by strong inner knowledge. We learn where we end and the other person begins. For me, this is generally the action related to the most ethical response, which may be to speak up or be silent. Discernment helps one to recognize which is the best response. But perceptions may differ on what an ethical response is, as our ideologies and related emotions can impact the mental and intuitive process taking place. Social media is influential, but it's also filled with leading mistruths. So we need to know how to do both inner and outer research. Here's a process I use. What am I feeling? What more can I learn from this feeling without grasping onto mental explanations, forming cognitions that may be erroneous? In short, keep thinking to a minimum, so greater introspection of one's psyche can take place. What are the motivations behind the feeling? These motivations, overt or hidden, give us further clues. How deep do these go? Are they motivations based on social indoctrination, fear, loss of approval, or love for all? And then what do I really believe on my own without social, familiar, or religious influences? Next, how does this impact my actions? When I discern that my action might be predicated by fear, then I know it is not the best response. I want to know the best response, one that brings good, one that creates change. Is flexibility of mind needed? This means recognizing that a long-held belief does not apply to this new paradigm. Can we recognize it and make the necessary inner and outer changes? In summary, we can learn how to determine what the right sources for researching some of these conflicts facing humanity as we go through the breakdown of an old age so that a new one emerges. This goes beyond sex and gender, beyond religious, political, and cultural differences. This is about the transformation of humanity itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I think you brought in some really deep insight into this whole idea of finding a purpose, right? And why this is an important spiritual task, and why science has a major role to play in terms of fulfilling that spiritual task. I'm sure we will delve deeper into that during the discussion round. I'm very happy to follow up on what Sharon, the conceptual framework that Sharon brought about, that is finding a balance between your pursuit of things and also your inner transformation. And with this, I would like to begin my presentation as well. I think it'll be very odd for me as a moderator to introduce myself. All I'd like to do is I would leave that grander part aside. Well, I am currently associated with the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, and I am a PhD, final year, a PhD student at the Department of Communication. I also am an instructor of record, teaching writing as communication to undergrads at the Department of Communication. have taught public speaking and cultural communication as well. I just completed a graduate certificate in feminist studies from this wonderful Women, Gender, Sexuality Studies department here at UMass as well. I am a Tibetan. I'm very, very proud of my identity, of my roots, because it has shaped who I am today. But today I call myself a global citizen, someone with a voice of conscience. And I think I call myself as someone who really wants to change the world. This may sound boisterous, but now I've come to believe that as an individual, you really hold that power to affect change. And that's why, coming from a scholarly circle, my approach toward education slash pedagogy is education is the tool for social change. And how I design my class, my course, my engagement with my students, my dissertation, my academic conference presentations is I always look at that element of that thing called critical consciousness and consciousness raising. So any of my academic engagements, right, that lacks that element, I feel I haven't really achieved my goal. So I don't measure my success in academic circles as having this tenure track position or having this paycheck or having some kind of authority, but in my everyday work, be it with my students, be it with my own scholarship, or with anybody for that matter, as long as it kind of really underscores that element of consciousness raising, and it's spiraling towards what I call as social change or action, social action. I think that kind of really sets the benchmark for my success, and that's my approach to life, to work, and with this webinar as well, I'm trying to achieve that. It's a small drop in the ocean, but how everything you do, everything you speak comes from this sense of being aware, innermost awareness is enlightenment for me. And that's why I'm very happy that Sharon had kind of really set the stage. And I would like to explore why a deep consciousness is important in today's world. And for that, I'd like to take all of us back to 2020. March 2020, the world came to a standstill. COVID was declared a pandemic, and it affected me in I think in a great way. I wouldn't say good or bad, but the impact was deep because it was the month when I was preparing for my comps, for my PhD. And my PhD has been a long, arduous journey. It took so many years because I was studying. Then there was this, hey, your work is calling. Then I left my studies, went back to India, to Dharamsala, the seat of Tibetan government in exile, worked actively for 3 years. Then I felt, oh my God, I started this important work, I must continue, and then came back from being a professional to back to being a student. So comms was an important milestone in our PhD career. And when I was about to write comms, which also requires an in-person closed book exam, COVID struck and campus was closed. There were no spaces for studying, and COVID and comms during that point in time was a matter of life and death for me, because I left my work, my career, my everything in India, and came back to the US, came to UMass, took on this challenge, saying I'm going to complete my PhD in 3 years, no matter what. And then COVID struck and everything fell apart. And and it was during that time that I was feeling very anxious. And for the first time in my life, I was having this thing called anxiety attacks late into the night, uh, hot sweat, unable to sleep, feeling sick, a loss of appetite. And it was just a downward spiral. And I remember telling myself, is this the end of me? And then, as any Tibetan would do, what we started doing was we took recourse to spiritual teachings of spiritual leaders on the digital space. And thankfully, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is my spiritual teacher, my spiritual guru, was embarking on this digitally mediated teachings online. And I started tuning in because that was my therapy, right? Everything shut, all the study spaces, the UMass counseling center, everything was closed. It felt like an apocalypse. And then all of a sudden, the Dalai Lama decided to go online and give his teachings as usual because he believed in the power of technology. And I saw people from across the world, including ones from mainland China, tuning in, and I was also tuning in. And strangely, as we say, you should believe in magic, how with every low there is a high. And I always felt it sounded like a cliche when it said, when great thinkers had said life is 10% what happens to you and 90% how you react to it. Strangely or coincidentally, today, 2.5 years later, in hindsight, my dissertation actually is about the Dalai Lama's teachings during COVID online, because I'm a communication student. So there is communication, there's culture, and more importantly, there's this digital media. And I'm toward the end, toward the tail end of finishing my dissertation. Sharon, again, is one of my dissertation committee members. And so in hindsight, I would say, hey, was March 2020 a watershed moment in my life? It really kind of shaped the trajectory of my academic career and defined and shaped who I am. It informed ways I see myself and I see everything around the world. So yes, the biggest moment of discernment for me came about with COVID, and it stayed with me because today we're tackling a more important issue, that is climate change. So I'm going to dwell a little bit on that. So when I was drawing on the Dalai Lama uh, as a part of my way of seeking therapy, in return, I was getting loads and loads of data for my dissertation because everything fell apart when there were travel restrictions that came in place. I couldn't travel for my fieldwork. So I had to change everything. And I didn't want to start afresh because it would be another 5 to 7 years. And so I started studying what the Dalai Lama had to say. And thankfully, most of his teachings are to do with the practical concept or measures to really healing this world, coming on the heels of COVID, on the threshold of climate change. How do you find that healing? What can mankind, humanity do? And thankfully, a lot less was on this religious ceremonial engagements. And I loved that about him during COVID. His engagements were most, I would say, what Sharon would say as the purpose of finding that, finding healing, and why that is a spiritual task, changing the world, transformation of the self, looking at that as a spiritual task, not just associated with science. It is associated with science. And that's why when I studied the Dalai Lama, I found an amalgamation or the merging of science and spirituality for humanity. So in April 2020, just a month after COVID was declared a pandemic, the Dalai Lama had written an opinion piece on Times Magazine, and it was titled, "Prayer is Not Enough. The Dalai Lama on Why We Need to Fight Coronavirus with Compassion." And he narrated a very interesting anecdote where he said, There are people asking him to help them, come out of COVID, to help to do some kind of a magic, with his prayers. But then he told that very same person that he does not have a magical power, because if he did, he wouldn't be experiencing sore throat, he wouldn't be feeling the pain in his legs. And what he said was, we're all same as human beings. We have the same fears, we have the same hopes, we have the same uncertainties. And that's where he brought about the practical implication of the Buddhist notion of impermanence. I've been hearing about impermanence since I was in the second grade. COVID made me realize why impermanence is a reality, right? 2.5 years down the lane, we have lost so much. And I think this tells so much about impermanence. And that's why the Dalai Lama used impermanence as an important frame to tackle COVID crisis. This is not a one-off incident. There will be many more impacting humanity. Impermanence is inevitable. And he reasoned that although all sentient beings is acquainted with suffering and truths of sickness, old age, and death, but as humans, we have the capacity. Human has this wonderful, marvelous brain, human intelligence to conquer anger, to conquer panic, and to conquer greed. And there he brought in this concept of emotional disarmament. It talks about using the mind to see things realistically and clearly without confusion or rage. And in explaining how the Buddhist notion of interdependence slash interconnectedness strengthens one's understanding of the concept of universal responsibility. And he said, this terrible coronavirus has shown that what happens to one person can soon affect every other being. And COVID showed it in unprecedented ways. And this kind of reinforces the understanding or the importance of compassionate or constructive act. And we also saw compassion during times of COVID. Nurses and doctors, scientists working on making that cure available, right? People on the front lines working selflessly, sacrificing themselves for the greater good. Even if it meant social distancing. I do know Sharon has spoken about how people saw social distancing as a difficult thing to do, but apparently there are also studies that suggest that once social distancing was communicated as a preventive measure, not only for the self, for the other, apparently people took a very different approach to social distancing, and they felt they were taking part of healing, of the healing process on a much larger scale, in the context of the wider community. And that's why this whole rhetoric of positive identification, as I would say, from the communication standpoint, where you identify social distancing as a compassionate act, it does tell you that yes, as humans, yes, we are born into this world that is riddled with suffering, but there is this human mind that can see things realistically and overcome all of that. And one of the things that the Dalai Lama beautifully took note of is with COVID, yes, it affected our body, mind, and spirit. But then strangely, for the first time, I heard that human body could create something called antibodies that could cope with COVID, right? So once you've had COVID, you've recovered, second time you get it, it might not impact you that deeply because your body has built something called an antibody. And that's why I think the human capacity to be resilient and to fight and to challenge and to come out of it in triumphant manners, I think that's our strength. So talking about coping mechanism, COVID can also be seen as offering a valuable lesson, I must say, for the global collective response to tackling any kind of crisis. Now that we have faced the exam, the results are out, why don't we use it as a model for something much deeper, something that's going to impact us in in a larger scale, and that's climate change, right? So, though COVID and climate change might seem unrelated at the very outset, apart from the fact that both are global threats, but I see COVID as an immediate threat that showed us the possibility of the obliteration of the human race, right? But it didn't do that. But climate change, how I see it, is something that's forceful. It's an impending threat that could turn that very threat into reality. And as one of my favorite authors, Arundhati Roy, said, COVID stuck all of us, but it also was quite discriminatory because the rich and the more secure people were able to protect themselves. It was the poor who suffered the most. But climate change is going to be brutal. It's not going to see class, caste, nationality, color. It's going to really hit us hard in ways unprecedented. And that's why I think COVID presents as a frame of reference to the possibility and severity of climate change and why the need to take action in protecting the planet from such an eventuality. And that's why being conscious of what you do, how you control your anger, I think it's crucial. And I will have the last 3 minutes talking about why consciousness is important, because it all starts with individual consciousness. We think climate change is too big an issue to tackle. It's for the policymakers, it's for the scientists, it's for the industrialists who is polluting the earth. But then we also have to realize that what we do on an individual basis, right, coming from that innermost awareness of our own actions, does go a long way in addressing climate change. And that's why I think being conscious, and for this, again, I'd like to draw on the Dalai Lama. He spoke about why consciousness is central in human nature. And for that, he gave a very interesting example about the conception of a child, how a women conceives a child. It's not just the sperm and the ovum, right, that does the work, but it takes place, that whole conception takes place only when these two, the sperm and the ovum, are joined with consciousness. And that's why I think everything you do, it all starts with your consciousness, and it's your mind, it's your mental consciousness, not your sensory consciousness that's kind of guided by your greed to always want more things, to accumulate things. But once you have a rested mind and you see things realistically, and even the water you use on a daily basis, even the energy that you use on a daily basis, being aware, being conscious is your contribution as a global citizen to addressing this existential threat that's climate change. And that's why I'd like to conclude by saying that, yes, after COVID, climate change is the new crisis. It always has been the new crisis, just that COVID showed us, or COVID kind of really, I think, showed the mirror to the real danger of climate change, and why addressing that is important for all of us. And for that, we need to move from the conceptual to the practical. And as Sharon said, from theory to practice. And that's why for us to have a deeper understanding of a mental consciousness and understanding of the fact that we need to coexist peacefully in this world. And I think what we need to really kind of understand is what Professor Michelle Shihota, who's a psychologist and director of Substance Abuse and Addiction Translational Research Network at Arizona State University, she pointed out to the fact that when we look at a problem and get caught up in its short-term implications, like finding the right vaccine, doing everything over Zoom, when we get caught up in these, what happens is we forget to adopt a broader approach. And when we do that, when we are too caught up, when we are in that utter chaos, we miss out on finding ways to relax our mind and take the long view. Because what the Dalai Lama says is that it's only in a rested or a restful state that the mind can actually relax. Because an anxious and a restless mind will impede the use of human intelligence. And that's why I think the solution lies in creating a deeper sense of peace within oneself. And for that, I think being warm-hearted is the key. And I would like to conclude with a belief, and over the years, I really come to see it with conviction that warm-heartedness is the key to a greener world. And if we think we're too small to make a difference, let me quote the Dalai Lama again, when he said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try sleeping with a mosquito. So I'm going to end on this note, and I'm very happy to hand it over to Aisha to talk about why the need for discernment is important and how it all starts with the personal self. So over to you, Aisha. You need to unmute. Can you unmute, Aisha?
Yes,
Cool.
yes, it's on mute now. Thank you, Dhardon. Thank you, Sharon. Greetings to our dear honorable guests. Before I start anything, I think we have to have about 10 seconds of silence to relax our minds and be ready to listen to more. I can see that we have many common things, Sharon, Dhardon, and myself. That's why I will go direct without saying anything about the problems we have or the benefits we had from COVID. I want to say that to start by saying that nature is a great teacher. It's in the heart of darkness the dawn is born. In the darkness of the soil, good seeds grow and turn into blossoming trees. That's what we hope for. That's why we should never lose hope or belittle the power of a word of truth or kindness, however small, to be a cause for a change. I do believe in Maulana Rumi's sayings. All the darkness of the world cannot extinguish the light of a single candle. It's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. The candles are many, but the light is one. I pray that we all are among the humans who made choice to be candles by kindling our hearts and minds and let them guide our steps to what is good for ourselves, our fellow humans, and our planet Earth. Albert Einstein says, no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. From that perspective, I do believe that the change we are seeking is only possible through a shift in consciousness on both the individual and collective level. The start is gaining self-awareness, or what we call deep self-knowledge. Herein, I remember some words of my father, Sayyid Rafa Muhammad Rafa, when he says, the loftiest of all science is the one related to human knowledge of their own selves. And the most cherished of all gains for a human being is is to realize being really human. Those words have taught me always that being a real human being is an elevated state of creation to be attained by knowing who we are on diverse levels and the role of our inner life in creating our surroundings. In that context, I also remember my spiritual teacher, Sayyid Ali Rafea, when he says, if we change from within, things around us will also change. That's so because all the events that happen to us on daily basis are related to what goes on in our minds and hearts. Then how can we change? I'm sharing with you some questions that I directed to myself and tried to answer them according to my own humble knowledge and experiential reflections. What happens when we do not nurture our self-awareness or do not deepen self-knowledge? My answer is we simply lose our innate distinct nature as humans created with higher potentials. We become encased in matter with all its limitations, and we become heedless of the need to nurture our souls. Being overpowered by the urgent needs of the physical life alone, we meet some conscious or unconscious sufferings caused by what I call spiritual deprivation and or starvation. When we are stuck in matter, we are controlled by many kinds of fears that have been existing since the primitive age, the fear of annihilation and the fear of being attacked by outside surroundings. When our approach to life is controlled by fear, we miss our innate powers and assume that our safety lies only in conquering others, or else they will for sure dominate us. We become stuck in a very superficial and threatening life. Then, how is absence of deep self-knowledge related to the mishaps taking place in our world? My answer, a life with no deep knowledge of our highest potentials simultaneously breeds in humankind some abusive qualities such as greed, selfishness, false pride, superiority, violence, and the craving for control as means of defense mechanisms. Such qualities, I think, are the roots of all wars, conflicts, and extremist trends in politics, religion, economics, ideologies, and even personal relationships. Lack of deep self-knowledge led to the birth of materialism, and in turn to the culture of consumerism, which nourishes in humans the elusive convictions that they cannot be happy, safe, and fulfilled unless they buy this or that. With no deep self-knowledge, people have been abusing the technological progress made in mass communication and mass media. When the world has turned into a global village, as Marshall McLuhan coined the term in the 1960s, there was a hope or an expectation that people in the whole world would know more about each other, come closer, and that would help in uprooting long-lived cultural conflicts and misunderstandings. What happened is many people are gradually dragged to live in the virtual reality of the mass media, away from being in touch with their inner world, with each other, and with nature. On the energy level, a human is led to isolation rather than communication. Many families are trying to avoid this phenomenon, but it is growing and growing among children themselves and also the youth. My third question was, what is self-knowledge? How can we deepen it? What happens then? For me, self-knowledge is a state in which we once and again discover and activate our full potentials. We awaken to our multi-interrelated dimensions, the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. We cannot say this or that, which is better. There is no better, no worse. this is truth, that we are physical beings, that we have minds, that we have senses, and we have a spiritual essence. So they have to work together. Or I have learned to push them to work together. Then we learn how to allow them to connect and work in resonance, which leads to a life of wholeness. With a sense of wholeness, we become increasingly aware that we are more than matter and discover that we are connected to a higher source of intelligence, to each other, and to all creation. Accordingly, we realize that we are not created in vain, and that each and every one has a mission to fulfill and a role to play in the lives of others. We are created to integrate, not to compete or fight. I believe that we can deepen self-knowledge by originating a style of life which basically includes the following practices. First, it's crucial to have regular moments of deep silence and stillness. That's to retreat from the noise of the world and also the noise of the impulsive thoughts. This can be realized through different kinds of meditations, prayers, diverse worship systems, or Sufi zikr, in which we recite some holy words and resonate with their subtle vibrations. The core of all of them is to dwell in our spiritual essence for some time, away from distractions. For instance, focusing on the breathing for several minutes, visualizing a spark of light in one's heart, or envisioning the picture of a holy figure and spiritual teacher for few minutes regularly, we enter into a state of an elevated spiritual presence. Herein, I agree completely with Dhardon and Sharon that this should not be a spiritual bypass. It's not that we escape or anesthetize our senses, because this will turn to be useless. But I do believe that it's very important in a life of wholeness, because in such a devout company, we gradually become more and more in touch with our spiritual origin, discovering our belonging to a higher realm of life, to the universal intelligence, to God, to truth, to Brahma, to Atman, to any name that we call this power, this great power, this high power we are connected to. This is very, very important. I find it as something I don't know how I can live without it. Second, we need to gain consciousness of our inner witness. Here we come back to our humanity. The term inner witness points to one of our dormant highest potentials as human beings. When we turn inwardly to galvanize it, it becomes like our constant and honest companion. The inner witness is like an innate eye or a subtle observer that can detect and read what is behind our body reactions, our recurring thoughts, our unconscious convictions, feelings, and behaviors. As such, we awaken to the roots of our sufferings, confusions, unhealthy or distorted convictions, and or emotional illusions. We simultaneously learn how to embrace them in healthy ways that promotes self-acceptance, inner liberation, and resourcefulness. So all the time, it's like going deep in what's beyond our humanness, to come back with a new vision, to come back with a new energy, to come back with new eye, the eye of God within us, to see what's going on actually. Third, we need open to fresh reflections on the wisdom and light that has been existing on earth since creation and up till now. By fresh, I mean direct connection with a pure heart and sound mind to the sublime energy of the original ancient esoteric paths, as well as heavenly revelations. They are not mere words. They are not ancient. They are now, because the light that came to earth through all teachers of humanity is present and alive in their words and their teachings. Therein we realize that the core invitation in all of them is to deepen self-knowledge, to seek a sense of wholeness, and to gain a fulfilling life. For instance, we can be genuinely inspired by Jesus, peace and blessing be upon him, when he says, the kingdom of God is within you. I know that this is something very famous of the gospel, but it will still be inspiring every time we read it with our hearts. Can we actually see or reveal the kingdom of God within us? This is a continuous process. And we remember to nourish our souls, because also Jesus tells us, it is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. The life is more than meat, and the body is more than raiment. In the same direction, the Holy Quran reveals to us, God's signs are on the earth and within you. Don't you see? God forms human in due proportions and breathed into him of his spirit. And he endows you with hearing and sight and feelings, as well as minds. How seldom are you grateful? I always ask myself how to be grateful. And I find the answer. To be grateful is to make good use of all our God-given potentials, to take good care of the body and make it a proper house for the soul to dwell in, to build a continual consensus between the two levels of our earthly existence, so as we have a richer and a more fulfilling life. The following question was, what happens when we deepen self-knowledge? My answer, with deep self-knowledge, we would not be easy victims to the propaganda of consumerism. We will have the inner freedom of choosing the kind of an audience, of an authentic life, which we love and really enjoy, and not a one overimposed on us by anyone. When our inner witness is alert and active, it guides us to the kind of happiness that no one and nothing can take it away, because it is the nature of the soul. When we are in touch with our soul, our deeper senses can taste the beauty of all the blessings when showering in our life, and we appreciate them. Even when we have some hardships, our soul reassures us about a hidden blessing therein, and they empower us to turn them into tools of growth. By enhancing deeper self-knowledge, we can really live the golden rule revealed in different expressions in all heavenly revelations, primordial religions, and esoteric paths. Love for your fellow what you love for yourself, and do not do to others what you hate to be done to you. This is not easy. Actually, this is a very consistent and honest journey. It's not a matter of mere perception. It's a matter of experience and facts. by existentially living this golden rule, we will not be deceived by religious fanaticism or any other kind of extremism with their justifications for hating each other, hating what we call the other. There is no other. Pushing to violence or any destructive behaviors disguised under the attractive slogans. We will not believe that. Rather, we can always choose to be more loving, understanding, and respectful to ourselves, to all people, and to our Mother Earth. This is the change that we hope to effectuate and live all around. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aisha. I think you offered us a very important framework for practicing deep silence and knowing that spirituality comes in all forms, be it the teachings of Jesus or be it Islam or any religion across the world has one message, that of peace, that of personal transformation, and that of finding that deep silence in an impulsive thought. We'll have a little bit more discussion on that. But before I actually get to the speakers discussion forum, I'd like to briefly introduce Aisha. Many of you will definitely know her, but I must tell you that Aisha actually is a researcher / a writer in spirituality and is founders of the nonprofit Ein Foundation Between Soul and Soil, which is dedicated for spreading self-awareness among Egyptians with focus on the less privileged children, youth, and adults. And I think it's such a noble job for Aisha to be doing. And she's designer of the program Be Yourself, which focuses on supporting people to activate their multi-dimensional potentials so as to become more capable of turning their life challenges into means for growth on all levels. And Aisha is co-author of One Humanity, One Home, Journeys of Spiritual Seekers. Another important book, Divine Revelation and Human Interpretations. Also, Beyond Diversities, Reflections on Revelation, Islam from Adam to Muhammad and Beyond. She presented several papers in Islamic spirituality to international conferences. She's written more than 15 self-development stories for children. She also wrote Parenting, Connection, Cooperation, Joy, a book in Arabic for conscious parenting, and several books on Islamic spirituality. Aisha has worked for a diverse Egyptian, Arab, and international mass media before being dedicated to be a spiritual activist. And I think this speaks a lot about the person Aisha is, the illustrious career that she has been embarking on and continues to do this day. And I think that this is the change we're all seeking to achieve. So before we actually get to accepting questions from our attendees, I'd like to request Sharon to pose a question that all of us can engage with.
Thank you. I had to unmute myself, so sorry for that little break. As I was listening to all of our talks, a very important question came up for me in terms of long-time observations. And I want to go back to this topic of spiritual bypass too. All the world's religious traditions were noted, and they have also taught us how to reach these deeper states, more peaceful states, and what have you. But if we look at the last 7,000 years of these, or not 7,000, but less than 7,000 years of these religions, it hasn't done a great deal to change humanity. Individuals, yes, but we need to apply these, and we haven't applied them because we've used them more as a separation from, and we haven't brought them into the heart of where they're needed. And earlier I was having a conversation with Aisha on this, and she mentioned how emotions are the cue. And I wanted to open up a discussion on that because I also noted that usually we get our deepest self-knowledge when difficult emotions come. So I'd love to hear what both of you have to say about this topic because it's an important one.
Do you want to go first, Aisha?
Okay, I would love to handle 2 points that Sharon mentioned. One of them, and this came in my speech, Yani, it is not a bypass. It is not, yani, spirituality or to be deep in our hearts or to have this silence is not a bypass, because emotions are important and we cannot grow until we discover more about ourselves as humans. And I think Sharon explained that in her speech, and also Dhardon touched upon that. So I don't want to repeat that. But I wanted to, what I want to respond to Sharon's saying that they have not been enough as they came in religions and spiritual paths and so on. It's not because they are not important or they are not working. The meditation, the zikr, the prayers, the worship system. The point is, people turned them into dogma. That we can see many people that have the image of God like an authority who tells them, do that, don't do that. You have to pray 5 times a day, or else you will go to hell. They read it in a way that killed spirituality. It killed their essence. So but when we have, that's why I said we have to read them afresh by pure connection. So if I speak about my personal experience, or at least what I believe and practice, they remind you along, for me, but I mean, any discipline, some people make it in the dawn, midday, or at night. I'm not talking about the shapes of this. I'm talking about the essence. The essence is along the day, you are in a company of a spiritual power. It's not separate from what you are doing. When you are energized by your meditation or zikr or prayer, you come back to your work with more energy, with loving energy. And when you treat with people, you are full of this energy and it inspires you. So I don't want to put them the mind or the behavior or in opposition to spirituality. I cannot understand it this way.
Right.
If we understand it this way, we are creating another kind of separation. That's what I think. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's very true, Aisha, because if we separate them, we're not really living our spirituality.
Yeah.
And I look forward too to what Dhardon has to say on this from the Buddhist perspective, Tibetan perspective.
Yes, I think I completely agree with Aisha. Any kind of religious traditions that enforces or is imposing in nature, I think it contradicts its very principle. Because for me, religion, spirituality, whatever you call it, it's about transforming oneself, right? It's about giving the other person the space to grow, to realize, to make mistakes. You know, as you say, you fall 8 times, but you get up 9 times. I think it's as simple as that. And that's why I'm so glad, Sharon, you asked me to speak about the Buddhist perspective. Again, Buddhism here is not a religion / a cult or a practice, but Buddhism, as I understand, is the science of the mind, and it's for everybody. And when I think in every homes, irrespective of an individual's religious belief, I see the statue of Buddha, because that embodies peace, serenity, that embodies compassion. The Buddha mind, again, it does not just belong to Buddhist believers alone, it's for everyone. And so when I keep saying the Dalai Lama and Buddhism, I'm not trying to claim ownership or anything. I think it's for everybody, just as Jesus is, just as Islam is. And that's why when I say Buddhism, my understanding of Buddhism is not a religion, it's not a cultural practice, but it's a science of the mind. That's why meditation is such an important component of Buddhism, right? If you're looking at Buddhism as a spiritual bypass, then it serves as an antidote to the very teaching of the Buddha, who said that a disciplined mind is a source of joy. It's all about disciplining your mind, because an unruly one brings distress. And that's why it's the root of all our suffering is our mind, right? There's so much power in this little whatever organ that's sitting in your head. And that's why the practice of dharma, as I would say, is to transform the mind. And if I were to go a little deeper, I found it very interesting to understand that Buddhism actually outlines 51 mental factors, and they divide it into 6 categories. 5 are the ever functioning mental factors, 5 are the ascertaining ones, 11 constructive emotions, 6 root disturbing emotions and attitudes, 20 auxiliary disturbing emotions, and 4 changeable mental factors. So that's like deep philosophical. I don't want to get into that, but all I want to say is, based on this understanding, we can actually learn how destructive emotions arise, under what circumstances, because as Sharon said, you will only be disturbed amid a chaos, right? When everything is nice, calm and serene, you don't have that the challenge does not exist to find peace, right? When you're always at peace. So that's why it's under difficult circumstances that destructive emotions arise. And when destructive emotions arise, you need an antidote, and that's peace of mind. And that's where I keep going back to COVID, to tell us why it put us under such a flux that it made us crave for peace. In ways unprecedented, people were seeking spiritual recourse because they wanted to find peace, not because they wanted to escape, right? They wanted to face the reality and come out of it. And I think what is really important is to understand spirituality not as a theory or a concept, but as a practice that concerns mental consciousness, and that concerns to an individual as a transformative tool. So spirituality, for me, is a transformative tool that can enhance compassion, enhance warm-heartedness. As I said, warm-heartedness is key to a greener, happier world, and that can actually bring to an individual what we call a peace of mind, because peace within is peace without.
Right. Right. For me, what really helps is, let's say that I have a difficult response to something. In looking at myself, going within, I can see where it might have an edge to it that is not my chosen behavior, but I'm able to read that. I'm able to read what's going on and then choose within the midst of that what brings greater peace, so that the two come together, rather than so many people caught up more in the opposites, where I think being able to be present and to hold the opposites and in that place find peace is, for me, my major goal in terms of how I handle things and becoming a better human being, our goal.
All right. Thank you, Sharon and Aisha. We have the last 10-15 minutes. I see a lot of our friends are comrades, as I would say, in this group. Can I request everyone, if you feel comfortable, to turn on your cameras? It would be really nice to see your beautiful faces. Thank you, Amhar. Everyone or anyone feel comfortable to turn on your cameras. Rafea, thank you. I'm not sure if Andrew is able to turn on his camera, uh, because I wanted to keep the last 10-15 minutes to a friendly slash kind of an informal discussion. Because if you have, hi Andrew, lovely to see you. Uh, uh, Ask us anything, right? You could raise your hand, use the raise hand icon. Just ask anything. It could be from the discussion we have had, or it could be anything that you feel is urgent and pressing. So basically, I want to throw the floor open to our dear friends who've come to support us in this endeavor. So I see a message from Andrew. Wonderful and timely discussions from very wise and compassionate souls. Thank you, Andrew. I think it's very kind and generous of you to really support us in this important journey. I owe a lot to you. Thank you for bringing me to this whole idea of, you know, bringing consciousness from theory to practice. And Sharon has been a wonderful, wonderful partner in this important journey. And you have been a great support. So I think that's how real change comes, because I haven't met Andrew, right? I haven't met Andrew at all. And all of a sudden, Sharon introduces me to Andrew, and he brings me into this circle of wonderful people who are actually looking to seeking change. And I think that is what is needed at this point in time. So any
So much,
questions?
Dhardon. I have a question regarding that. Thank you so much for that. I've learned as much or more from all of you as anything you said about me, and so it's very reciprocal. And my question actually relates to what you just said, and it's for the whole panel, or really anyone in the group. What advice do you have for I guess, as you said in this meeting, that many of us here are of like minds and like hearts, but to really, I think, get at this lasting change that we're all hoping for in the world, we need to be able to reach across the aisle, so to speak, into the spaces where there are people that don't agree with us at all about the nature of these things. And we've brought up biblical allusions before. In the book of Jonah, in the Hebrew Bible, Jonah is told to go to Nineveh to preach this message of love and reconciliation from his God. And Nineveh was the capital of Assyria. Assyria had just come into Israel and wiped out 10 of the 12 kingdoms in Israel and taken them back as slaves into Assyria. And now Jonah is told, go to that place that just wiped out 3/4 of your people and bring them a message of love and reconciliation. And of course, Jonah doesn't want to do this. He says, I don't want those people to experience love and compassion. They've done all of this harm and created all of this pain. And so what advice do you have maybe for how we can deal with our own ego, our own wounding? My own pride and my own ego has gotten in the way of me working with people on these issues. Wounding I've experienced in those spaces, or maybe even unprocessed childhood trauma. There's so much that seems of this wreckage that seems to be there that gets in the way of making these vital connections and with the other. And so I'm just wondering what advice you have about that.
Thank you, Andrew. I think you brought out a very important point. This space is like-minded people coming together, and it's easy work. How do I talk to someone, maybe my neighbor, who believes that the war in Ukraine is justified? How do I talk to that person? I think that's like the big ask. And before I throw it open to Sharon and Aisha, I would like to tell everyone that the meeting is likely to close in 4 minutes. So I don't want an abrupt ending. So let's have 30 seconds for Sharon and 30 seconds for Aisha, so that we draw this meeting to a nice close. Yes, Sharon?
Okay, I generally have found that when dealing with people that have very opposite ideas, if they're in an extreme emotional state or very locked into their thought, I don't even bother to speak with them. I'd rather not put fuel to the fire. I would rather go on peaks. For instance, like when they were taking children away from the border a few years ago, from people coming up from Latin America, and they were taking children away from the parents and separating them. There's no way I can talk with somebody that believes that's an ideology to agree with. So I think I went beyond 30 seconds, but I think that's more of the self-knowledge as well. What do we engage with and where do we not add fuel to the fire?
Thank you, Sharon. That was really brief and concise and very, very practical, I would say. Aisha, do you have
I don't think I will add anything except that when I find, as Andy said, he said, my ego. So I think don't resist your ego, understand it and go beyond it. So when you go beyond it, you will find your essence who does not create separation between you and the other. So you will give him or her or them their space, and you just send love in any way. That's it.
Yeah.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you, Aisha. And I apologize. I will have to draw this event to a close because we just have 2 minutes. All I would say is thank you, each and every one of you here. I think we are, I would say, comrades in this important and vital journey, so much needed. But I think what Andrew asked us really poses a food for thought, as we would say. It is an important question that needs to be tackled. Maybe, Sharon, this warrants a different event to discuss this, right? How do we talk this, or how do we walk this talk with people who actually should be the focus of change, right? So I think this kind of really sets the stage for the next webinar, probably. So thank you everyone so much. And as Sharon spoke about personal transformation, Aisha spoke about deep silence, right? In that impulsive thought. I spoke about being in a restful mind to achieve peace of mind and to seek that change and the need for discernment. And for today, I think the practical measure to achieving that would be meditation. As simple as that. I'm so glad Aisha guided us through a very brief meditation practice. And I think it's all about, as a human, what do you breathe in? What do you breathe out? Because COVID showed that it threatened a capacity to breathe. Imagine, right? Your body could create antibodies, but once you stop breathing, you die. And climate change, addressing it is so important because we have to protect the air that we're going to breathe in. And here I'd like to bring a very important quote by the Dalai Lama, who said, breathe deep, think what it is to be human. So on that note, I'm going to conclude today's webinar. And this is an important work that Women in Global Change, led by the very able Dr. Sharon Mijares, seeks to achieve. And I think we are making important steps into this very important journey. Thank you for being on board. I hope to see you all again very soon. Have a good day and take care, all of you. Bye-bye.
And thank you,
Thank you
Dhardon.
very much.
Thank you, Dhardon. Thank you, everyone, Sharon.
Thank you.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you,
Yeah,
Dhardon and Aisha.
Prima, thank you.